Last year, a priest friend of mine lost 40 pounds. So I asked, how'd you do it? And he said, it was a lot of swapping old habits for new ones. He had to trade his morning bowl of Cocoa Puffs for an egg white omelet. And for lunch, instead of having a sandwich with chips, he would have salad with an apple. And he said he cut out pasta. He was used to having pasta 3 or 4 nights a week for dinner. And he said, no, I had to cut that back. So those were the big changes. But he said, the big secret, though, is Fridays. That's my cheat day. And I started in the drive-thru at Starbucks with a big Frappuccino. And then I can have a sandwich with chips that day if I want. I can have pasta for dinner. I imagine he could even have a bowl of Cocoa Puffs. But I think there's wisdom there, don't you think? Cheat days are the secret to a lot of things in life. They're part of how we develop habits that we can stick with. It allows us to let some of the steam off, to release some of the pressure. So a lot of those things are the greatest joys in life. The one day a week that you don't have to set an alarm. Or the 1 week a year that instead of being at home and working and puttering and having a job or doing whatever you do, you instead spend it on the coast of Maine or on Cape Cod or in New Jersey. And you spend the whole week strolling along the ocean and eating fried seafood. I know one family in Cooksaki who calls the day after Thanksgiving not Black Friday. It is called Pie for Breakfast Day. So there are things in life that exceptions to the rule really help to fuel. But there are other things that we can have no cheat days for. And I think no matter what your business trip involves on the way to Vegas, there's no cheat days, even in Vegas. A recovering alcoholic can't say, oh, I'm just going to drink today, or I'm just going to drink on the weekends, or I'm just going to drink on New Year's. There's no cheat days for that. And I think all of us can understand how it makes the news if a priest thinks that it's okay to take a cheat day from a vow. Jesus says, for some things, there are no cheat days. And here is the list of 3 things there are no cheat days for. You never get a cheat day for loving God. You never get a cheat day for loving yourself. And you never get a cheat day for loving your neighbor. There are no days off for that, no holidays. It's an everyday discipline. So let's take a look at those 3, just briefly, one at a time. The first one, no cheat days for loving God. Now, if I made a rule like that, it might be because I'm insecure. If I said, oh, you have to love me every day, I might be worried, what's going to happen if they stop loving me? But God is not motivated by insecurity. That rule is not made by God for God. It's made by God for us. Because that's the scripture that says, in God we live and move and have our being, is telling us the truth. There's no wind in our sails without God. There's no gas in our tank. There's no juice in our blender. God is what fuels everything. So God doesn't make that rule because it would hurt God. God makes that rule because we would fall apart. And if you're like me, you've got personal experience of that when you have taken your eyes off of God, things fall apart. It's like Peter walking on the water. As long as his eyes are fixed on Jesus, he can walk straight across that water. But at the moment he takes his eyes off, he sinks. So we don't get cheat days for focusing on God. That would be like having a cheat day where you don't plug your appliances in one day. They won't work. It doesn't make any sense. No cheat days for loving God. Jesus says this is the greatest and the first commandment for obvious reasons. The second is like it, he says. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The word neighbor caught me because why didn't he say brother or sister? Why didn't he say you shall love your brother or sister as yourself? Brother or sister is a closer relationship than neighbor, isn't it? I mean, we have neighbors, some of us, that we don't really know that well. The family that moved in a few years ago and we never really got to know them, they keep to themselves. Why is it that he said neighbor and not brother or sister? I think it's because we tease our brothers and sisters. And we've got baggage with our brothers and sisters. And Jesus wants to make it clear, you've got to be more on your game with your neighbors than with your brothers or sisters. Now, if you wanted to dig up some dirt on me and my flaws, my brother would be happy to give you his number. Because he knows me well. We're 16 months apart. I'm the older. Can you imagine the stuff he has to tell you about me? But our neighbors we're much more careful with because there's a lot of repercussions with neighbors. So we're careful to make sure that our dog doesn't bark all night. Not because we care, but because our neighbors might care. We're careful with where our branches land after a storm. We're cautious about that. We want to make sure that we don't start any trouble because trouble with a neighbor is real trouble. If you know anyone or if you have experience with having tension with a neighbor, that messes a lot of things up. So Jesus says, look at everybody like a neighbor, like one of those VIPs that you want to honor because you don't want any trouble. Treat them like someone who has an opinion that really matters to you. No cheat days for that. A cheat day starts trouble with your neighbor, and then you'll be paying for that for a long time. So, rule number 1, no cheat days for loving God. Rule number 2, no cheat days for loving your neighbor. Rule number 3, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Loving yourself. Now, you can be disappointed in yourself for certain things. I might be disappointed in myself for some lousy choices I've made in my life. I might disapprove of some of my actions. I might be disapproving of the fact that I have some habits or addictions that I haven't gotten a hold of yet, that I've got faults that are kind of raging and I know about but I don't fix. But we can't disapprove of ourselves. That would be disrespectful to God. God's the one who made this. God's the one who chose to bring it here now. We have to approve of God's choice. We can't veto God's choice. We have to approve of it. We have to ratify God's choice. And when you think about it, it wouldn't make sense to say that you can love your neighbor if you don't love yourself. It's kind of like saying, I love God, but you don't like the people that God made. You know, people who are nasty to others, but they say they love God. It doesn't ring true. Nobody believes it. How could you love the God that you can't see if you don't love the people that you do? Well, the same is true with loving our neighbor. How can we love our neighbor if we don't love ourselves? We can't give what we don't have. There is an African proverb that says, don't trust a naked person who offers you a shirt. Why wouldn't they be wearing it themselves? You can't give what you don't have. So we can't trust people who say they love us but don't love themselves. Do you see how it's all linked? That's why Jesus answered in this way. You have to love God. You have to love your neighbor. And you have to love yourself. No holidays, no vacations, no cheat days. So a good question is, which one of those is hardest for you? Is it hard for you to stay focused on God? Do you find yourself saying, oh man, I really sometimes take my eye off the ball there. I'm like Peter sinking in the water. Every time I get myself into trouble, I say, how did I get here? And I realized, oh, I haven't been getting to Mass. I haven't been praying. I haven't been doing those things that help me to stay afloat. Is your hardest loving your neighbor? Has this political season just shown you, oh my gosh, I'm an angry person. I can't get along with people that disagree with me. Loving my neighbor has conditions for me. Is that a struggle that you're experiencing? How about loving yourself? What's your self-talk like? Do you really believe that God made you and God doesn't make junk? Or do you look in the mirror and sometimes see God's image and likeness looking back at you and reject it? We have to work on whichever of these is our biggest struggle. Make that our first priority. Because Jesus says you gotta love God every day. You gotta love your neighbors every day. And you gotta love yourself. There won't be a holiday for this. No cheat days allowed.